I'm very glad that I finally got around to reading this book. Welcome, I am Charlie Airy, and this is my wrap-up for April. I've read a little bit more this month than the month before. I think I've adjusted a little bit to my new work, but because this is the season of new things, I am also moving house soon, which I'm very, very excited about. I'm going to be closer to the sea. I'm just the place just seems perfect for me, my partner, and the cats, which is obviously the most important bit. I'm just gonna head straight in with what I've been reading this month. The first one is Record of a Spaceborne View by Becky Chambers, which is the third of 4 in the Wayfarer series. I read this with my QPP. I mentioned this at the end of my last wrap-up because I was reading it then, so I finished it in April. I didn't read it fully in April. And I think I remember saying in my previous wrap-up that I wasn't sure where it was going and I was kind of waiting for it to build up to something, and you know what? It didn't build up to something. This book is a book about trauma. That is it, plain and simple. A big, terrible event happens at the start of this book, and then we jump forward into the future and kind of just experience a whole bunch of people's lives. Like, there are so many points of view, and yeah, you just get this rather rounded idea of the community that they live in, and just in the many, many ways that trauma can affect people. And yeah, it was a slow book, as Becky Chambers does. Slow, character-based sci-fi with queer undertones in everything, and I think it's fantastic. I didn't enjoy it as much as the second one, because the second one is just a masterpiece in its own right. It's hard to follow, but yeah, it was a slow burn, and you thought, how on earth am I going to connect to all of these characters in like probably like 300 odd, like 350 page book? You're like, there are so many characters, how can I connect to them all? And then at the end you sort of get a little insight into their future, and you're like, yes, you know, you're on their side, and you realise that actually you did have the time to get invested in them all, and it's fantastic. One thing that also really excited me about this book is that it showed a race that we had only seen from the outside before, like a species, and that's the homophobia. And there's these sort of tentacly colonialists who have to go around in like these sort of wheelchairs because a lot of like land is too abrasive for them, basically. And it was so fantastic to meet one properly and get a real sense of an individual's personality. And I was reading this out loud on Discord with my QPP, and it was just so lovely to really grasp that voice. The Harmonians have a very over-the-top way of speaking, a very indulgent way of speaking, and I found myself being like, can I read this chapter? Because I just really wanted to read like her bit, because it got me so excited, which was so nice, because before the Harmonians seemed very cold and distant, and this sort of just this species that you couldn't really understand. So it was so nice to sort of bring that in. I think that also kind of led me to a prediction about the last book, which I got correct, which I also read this month, but I'll hold my horses before I talk about that one. So the next book I read this month in full was Geek Love by Catherine Dunn. This is sort of touted as a cult novel. It's a cult novel and also a cult novel in a way, because it involves a cult in the middle of it. Not as a sort of exploration of, it's not central to the plot, but it's obviously a huge part of what the characters go through in their lives, but we see it from the outside. Anyway, this book is fantastic. It's like 30 years old now, and it just seems to have explored some things so bravely and done things so differently. It still feels fresh, I think, anyway. What it's about. This looks so innocent, doesn't it? Geek Love. How cute. In this context, geek means a circus performer who bites the heads off of live chickens. That is one of the original meanings of the word geek. That's the vibe we're going for. It's set in a travelling carnival, and the I got carried away already. Okay, so I basically started talking about this book and I realised that I'm going to do an entire video talking about this book because it is so great. I need to sit down and unpack this book properly, because if I could do it now it will take forever and it'll take just so much out of the video, and I want to give it its little time to shine. So I'm going to stop myself from rambling on about it and just say there is a video to come. Obviously, I'm very, very excited to talk about this, but I will hold back. I will hold fire. Now I can talk about The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers again. And this is the last book, which makes me sad. And I'm just so excited to read more from Becky Chambers, basically. So excited. But this was I really enjoyed this book. This book made me realise, it took me 4 books to realise, but Becky Chambers, even though we have interconnected characters throughout, Becky Chambers moves on. We move on from our characters and we don't get stuck with them. We don't return to them. That's just, you just have to deal with that. Which is such a strange thing, because we're so used to basically our audience wants of seeing the same world and the same characters over again. We have them indulge until we're absolutely sick of them. Becky Chambers refuses to do that, which I really appreciate, and also it still leaves me wondering what happened to some of the characters even from the first book. But that's just the case of, you know, we have friends throughout our lives and we think, oh, what happened to them? And we might not ever find out. And I think that's what it feels like with these books. I really liked this one. I said I predicted something about this book. So there's one species that we've come across but not met properly and spent any proper time with as a sort of central character. And that is the LaRue, and they are sort of these big furry species with long necks and long limbs, and they just seem like elastic, basically. That yeah, I enjoy them. They just seem like lovely people. This book starts with 2 LaRue characters, which got me really excited, and that's kind of what this book is about. It's you know, in a sitcom where all these characters get locked in an elevator, it's that kind of trapped room episode. That's what this book is, where there are tensions, natural tensions between characters, and they just have to like deal with it at first, and then they actually have to work with what tensions are there within themselves, with each other, and it's just a really, really gorgeous book. And yes, so we do have a familiar character in this book, and yes, I don't want to give too much away about it, really, but if you like that sort of 1 act 1 scenes kind of thing, it's not 1 act 1 scene, it's not like a whole thing, but like it is within a block of a few days, most of the novel, and it's with just a select few people, and I really enjoyed that because I love that in plays and all that sort of thing in films. So yes, I would just recommend this whole series, and I think I've got to do a whole video on this series talking about it in depth with all the spoilers in the world, just to indulge myself. But I think first I might have to make sure that my poor editor reads the last 2 books, because it would be very unfair to make them sit through through a video with all of the spoilers in the world for these books. But I think I definitely need to do a dedicated Becky Chambers video, because I've just really, really enjoyed their work so far, and I'm very excited to read more of their stuff in the future. So the next book I read was an audiobook, and it's Outline by Rachel Cusk. It's one of those books that I was looking at for ages. I remember I kept coming across it in Waterstones, like years ago. It must have been like almost when it first came out, and I liked the cover, and I saw a novel in 10 Conversations, and I was like, yes. And I think the fact that it was a series put me off, because I'm really picky when it comes to series, because I don't want to be pulled into something that just ends up kind of draining something and draining all of my money for all I've got, for the sake of sort of continuing on a story, if that makes sense. Like franchise movie things, like I can watch them, but I find it hard to invest. That's my little bugbear. But anyway, I'm very glad that I finally got around to reading this book, because a novel in 10 conversations sounds great. It reminds me of Cigarettes and Coffee, which is a fab film from the early 2000s, where it's literally like they stuck a couple of people in a room with coffee and cigarettes, and they had a conversation, and that happens with like multiple people. So that had me in from the start. And what also got me in was at the end of the first chapter. So she sits on a plane next to like a millionaire on her way to Greece to teach a creative writing course, which at first can seem quite distancing, because obviously it just seems like very, very like middle class, and doesn't really seem very down to earth, I guess. Not the books have to be. At first you're like, okay, you're sitting next to a millionaire on a plane, what's interesting? And he basically tells her his life story. And at the end of the chapter, what grabbed me is that she analyses his life story, his telling of his own life story, as if it was a piece of creative writing, which is a bit meta. And I just really enjoyed that kind of separation, that kind of, yeah, trying to take an objective view of someone's life. I just found it genuinely inspiring. It made me reflect on the novel that I've been wanting to write. I've been sort of juggling whether to write it as a novel or a short story, and I think what I've created so far in the planning stages is I've created multiple different interesting conversations, like with plenty of tension behind them to keep them interesting. And I think that's what Outline has like kind of inspired me to think. I've gone, oh, this is actually what I've created. I've created a series of interesting conversations. Now I just need to find a way to link those together. Like I do have a plot idea, but to make the story whole, I think there needs to be something just to kind of lightly string it together, rather than having some overarching plot that sort of dominates it all. Yes, I really enjoyed Outline. I will read more Rachel Cusk and continue this, and yeah, it's worth it. I'm glad that she's had a kind of little mini reprisal on BookTube at the moment, because I'm glad they kind of pushed me to read it. Otherwise I wouldn't have had those thoughts about my own writing. So yeah, definitely worth it. So Outlines I started listening to in my vlog, which is the last video I posted, so if you haven't seen it, go and have a look. And also in that vlog I read a bit of this book, The Oscillations by Kate Fox. And I've yet to finish this. This is going to be a slow read, because that's just how I read poetry. I don't really read it cover to cover, unless it's a single narrative piece. And yeah, I've been really enjoying it. Kate Fox is an autistic writer, and this is a book about the after times, which I can assume you know is now, and the before times, which was before March last year, because she was writing this book around that sort of time. So she had this clear line between the before and the after. So this book starts with the after and then goes to the before. And I'm currently in the after section and I've been really, really enjoying it. And it's just been so great to have that little bit of reflection. I think some people are like not wanting to go anywhere near this kind of fiction at the moment. But yeah, I'm kind of happy that I picked this up and started reading it now to kind of reflect on the times we're in right now. I am a little bit afraid to go to the before section because I don't know. I have a feeling it's going to make me feel very strong things. It could disappoint me, I don't know, but I'll have to report back because I might realise what we've all been missing in reading some poetry that was made just before all of this started. So I'm very interested to continue reading this book. Next, oh, I'm so excited about this one. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. I'm going to do another video about this. I know I'm teasing you with extra videos comparing this with American Psycho. I believe there is some influence from American Psycho. It's just very interesting. So, Boy Parts. We follow our main character, Irina, who photographs young men and in very compromising positions. She photographs men sexually. The story gets darker from there, essentially. It's a very, very dark book, and I actually did find it triggering myself. I realised that I was up at night thinking about horrible things, and then I was like, oh, this book triggered me. That's what happened. So yes, all of the trigger warnings, if you are cautious about that, but in both sort of evoking my own like trauma, I guess, it's one, Eliza Clark is an amazing writer and I want to read more from her because she is just so insightful and just absolutely nail head, really, on so many little observations about different kinds of humans, where, say, Irina will be like, oh, this guy's like this. He is this kind of guy, and then makes a list of assumptions about him, and you're like, oh, yep, that's the guy. I've met like 3 of him, which is obviously her being very calculating, but even then you're like, yeah, that's pretty true. That's pretty true. And this book kind of takes account of her sort of decline into a large mental health hole and also just a hole of immorality. It's so uncanny in the way that it can reflect yourself back at you, which is what makes me feel like stuff like this and stuff like American Psycho. It's why these kind of books get called like literary fiction, because they do reflect something back at us. Even in their horribleness, there is some truthfulness in these characters. So the fact that I could identify with this horrible, horrible person with horrible, horrible thoughts. Yeah, it's unnerving in a really interesting and kind of satisfying way. I have lots to talk about on this book, and I'm really excited to compare it with American Psycho. So I'm reading American Psycho. I can already see some things. There's gonna be a video about it. I'm excited to share that with you. The final book that I'm just gonna give a cheeky little mention to is a book I've just started with my QPP reading over Discord, and it's A Net for Small Fishes by Lucy Yago. This was one of my anticipated reads from some of my earlier videos, and I'm really excited to start reading it. So this was touted as the Thelma and Louise of the 17th century, which already had my interest, and the book so far, I'm not very far in at all. It's interesting. It's the characters have their own ways in that they are very normal in this society, and they also have their own quiet ways in that they really are not very normal, and that is the impression I have so far. This follows some real characters from history. I know one or two of the kind of stories around these people from the past, just in passing. I'm not a big history buff, but I'm gonna be really interested to continue reading this book. It's challenging me a little bit. Like both both me and my QVP keep pausing on words and being like, how do I say that again? Because obviously it uses a lot of historical terms, and just seems a rather like smart book. I'm excited to read more and see where this goes, because this was touted as gut-wrenching. So I am wondering if what we are seeing so far is very much normality and everything is downhill from here. Guess we're gonna find out. I just dropped all of my books. Thank you for watching this video. Have a nice week. I will see you next week. I'm gonna go clean up my books now and hope I haven't damaged any of them.